The door slams open, and I'm face to face with the woman who's been ruining my life for months, clipboard in hand, a cold, calculating smile on her face. The HOA has already signed off on the sale of your lake, she says, her voice dripping with entitlement. My heart stops. How did we get here? My fists clench, rage boiling inside me as I feel the walls closing in. I'm not backing down this time. This is war, and I'm ready to fight. But as she steps closer, I hear the words that send a chill down my spine. You have to vacate. Welcome back to Confessions of HOA. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. I've had my fair share of frustration with the HOA. Don't get me wrong. It's not just the fines or the pettiness, but the feeling of being trapped. You know that feeling when someone's constantly looking over your shoulder, ready to penalize you for the smallest infraction? That's the HOA for you. It's like living in a community where every single detail is micromanaged, down to how high your grass grows or whether your mailbox is the right shade of gray. But this time, it wasn't just some fine for a lawn that didn't meet the standard. Oh no, this time, they were after something much bigger, something personal. Let me take you back. I moved here to this quiet suburban neighborhood about 5 years ago. The kind of place you'd picture in a feel-good movie. Clean streets, kids riding bikes, neighbors waving hello. Everything felt perfect until the HOA showed up. At first, it seemed harmless enough, right? A few rules here and there to keep things looking nice. Sure, I could live with that. But then it became clear that they weren't just about maintaining appearances. They were about control, about authority, about enforcing a system that existed purely to make sure everyone followed their vision of what's acceptable. Now, I know you're probably thinking, come on, it's just a few fines, what's the big deal? But imagine, just imagine, being penalized for leaving your trash cans out an extra half hour after pickup, or getting a notice because your unsightly mailbox wasn't in compliance with their specific shade of beige. It's petty, it's infuriating, and it starts to eat away at you. It wears you down until every decision you make is filtered through the lens of what the HOA might think. That's the thing about Karen, the HOA president. You've probably met someone like her, the type of person who believes the rules apply to everyone except her. She's in her early 40s, tall, blonde, with a cold smile that just reeks of entitlement. The kind of person who believes that her word is law and anyone who questions her has it coming. Honestly, I tried to avoid her at first. I'm not one to pick a fight, especially with someone who clearly has so much power in the community. But power, as you know, corrupts. And Karen was no exception. It started with the usual issues, fines for this, warnings for that. I wasn't the only one dealing with it, but I was one of the few who didn't just take it lying down. I'd go to the HOA meetings, sit quietly in the back, just to see how they ran things. And every time, Karen would stand there with her smug little speeches about maintaining the integrity of the community, like she was some kind of neighborhood queen. I could feel the eyes on me whenever I questioned something, like I was the problem. But I kept my head down for a while. Then it happened. The one thing I thought I'd never have to worry about, my private lake. Now, you might be thinking, okay, it's just a lake, what's the big deal? But this lake was mine. I grew up swimming in it, fishing from its banks, watching my kids play by the shore. It wasn't just some body of water. It was a part of me, part of my family's history. I never thought the HOA could get involved with it. But I was wrong. One afternoon, out of nowhere, I get a letter from the HOA. At first, I thought it was just another fine for some ridiculous reason. But no, it was a notice about selling the lake. My heart stopped. The letter was so casual about it, like they had the right to make that decision. They were going to sell the lake to a private investor, to improve the community. The letter didn't even say why, just that the HOA had decided to sell it, and if I wanted to keep my property, I would have to go along with it. I'm sure you can imagine what was going through my head in that moment. It was as if someone had ripped a piece of my life away from me, without asking, without any warning, without any respect for what it meant to me. I'd spent years trying to keep my life separate from their petty politics. But now, here they were, encroaching on something I couldn't just give away. I mean, how did it even get to this point? I was angry, but more than that, I felt completely betrayed. By the HOA. By Karen. They thought they could just sell my lake like it was some piece of property to be traded. My heart was racing. My thoughts were all over the place. How could I let this happen? I had to do something. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to a system that had crossed the line. They'd taken enough from me. I had to find a way to fight back. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. The HOA had the power, the influence. And Karen? She had a whole army of supporters, blind to her manipulation. But I wasn't going to back down. I was going to take action, and I was going to make sure they knew they couldn't get away with this. And so, I made a decision. I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. I was going to take control. But before I could even start thinking of a plan, the HOA sent a person to my door. And that's when things really started to unravel. The woman at my door had a clipboard in her hand, a cold smile on her face. She said something that stopped my heart. The HOA has already signed off on the sale of your lake. You have to vacate. When I first moved here, I never thought I'd end up on the HOA's radar. I was just looking for a quiet place to settle down, somewhere my kids could run around without worrying about traffic or crime. The neighborhood was the kind of place you see in brochures. Neat rows of houses with perfectly manicured lawns, kids riding bikes on the sidewalk, and neighbors who smiled and waved as they tended to their flowers. I remember that first day I pulled up in the moving truck, unloading boxes as the sun dipped below the horizon. I thought, this is it. This is home. But somewhere along the way, home started feeling more like a prison. At first, the HOA seemed harmless. I didn't know the full extent of their grip on the neighborhood, and honestly, I didn't care. They were just doing their job, right? Making sure things looked nice. That's what they kept telling us at the meetings. Keep the neighborhood uniform, they said. Keep it clean. Fine. I wasn't going to argue with that. But slowly, it all started to feel a little invasive. You know the kind of people who don't just want to keep things nice. They want to control everything. That's Karen, the HOA president. The woman who truly believed her opinion on lawn care, mailbox colors, and garden gnomes was law. I'm sure you've met someone like her. The type who walks into a room and assumes they know better than anyone else, no matter what the situation. A little backstory on her. She's in her early 40s, tall with this blonde, icy cold aura about her. And I'm not exaggerating when I say she's the kind of person who treats the HOA as her personal kingdom. It's like she was born to lead, but with a superiority complex that was as thick as the fancy suit she wore to every meeting. At first, I didn't care much for her. I'd nod politely when she'd give one of her speeches about community standards, but for the most part, I kept to myself. It wasn't until I got my first fine that things started to shift. A fine for my mailbox being a shade too dark. I was furious. It wasn't even that dark. But Karen, of course, didn't care about my frustration. To her, it was just another rule that needed enforcing. And the worst part? I wasn't the only one. It wasn't long before I heard stories from other neighbors. Fines for hedges that were too tall, a garage door that didn't meet her exact approved color, or even a barbecue that was deemed unsightly because it didn't have a cover. And the fines weren't just annoying, they were escalating. At first, it was only a few bucks here and there, but then they started getting bigger. If you missed a deadline for a lawn update, it could be $100. If you didn't pay your dues on time, you'd be slapped with a $200 fee. Karen and the HOA weren't just controlling. They were making money off of people's mistakes. And she was loving every minute of it. It became a pattern. Every time I thought I could breathe, some new rule or fine popped up. I started to dread the letters in my mailbox, those pristine white envelopes with the HOA's logo on the top left. I'd open them with the kind of sinking feeling you get when you know something bad is about to happen. And it was always something ridiculous. One time, I was fined for leaving my trash cans out an extra half hour. Half an hour. It was infuriating. And that wasn't even the worst of it. Karen made sure to remind us at every meeting, eyes glinting with that I'm in charge look, that she was just trying to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. And then came the lake. The lake was everything to me. I grew up with it. It wasn't just a body of water, it was my sanctuary. Every evening, after a long day, I'd walk down to the shore and just sit there, watching the sunset. My kids would run around, jumping into the water without a care in the world. That lake had been in the family for years. I had fond memories of fishing with my father, and later, teaching my own children how to cast a line. It was my space, my peace, my escape from the constant pressure of life. No one could touch that. Or so I thought. One afternoon, I was walking back from the store when I saw Karen standing by the lake with a few other HOA members. My heart sank when I saw her. She had that look on her face, the one that meant she was about to make someone's life miserable. She turned, saw me, and gave me that practiced smile of hers. "Hey there," Glad you could join us, she said, as if everything was normal. We were just discussing the lake. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were planning something harmless, like cleaning up debris or putting in a new dock. But Karen's next words stopped me cold. We've decided it's time to sell the lake, she said casually, like it was just another property on the market. My stomach churned. Sell it, I repeated incredulously. Oh yes, Karen said, her tone sweet but dripping with authority. It's going to be developed. The HOA has already signed off on it. We'll be getting a good price for it. You'll be informed of the details soon. I stood there, speechless. I had to blink a few times to process what she'd said. The HOA, I repeated, trying to wrap my head around it. You can't just sell my lake. It's mine. Karen smiled. It's not yours, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. It belongs to the community, and the community has voted. You'll receive formal notice soon. I was about to say something, anything, when she turned and walked away, not even bothering to see if I had any further objections. As she disappeared down the path, I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't happening. As I stood there, trying to process what had just happened, I saw a car pull up to my driveway. The driver stepped out, holding a clipboard in his hand. This was it. The HOA had made their move, and I had no idea how to stop them. I can't even remember the last time I felt at peace in this place. It used to be my sanctuary, my escape. But every time I looked around, the walls of this HOA nightmare seemed to close in tighter. First, it was the mailbox. God, don't get me started on that. I thought I was being practical, a simple, sturdy box to keep the rain out. But no, it wasn't the right shade of gray. A shade of gray. Can you even imagine? A fine for something so trivial. But that was just the beginning. It was like every week, a new violation popped up, out of nowhere. A couple of weeks ago, I got another notice, this time, for my lawn being too high for HOA standards. Now, I'm no gardener, but I keep my yard decent. Sure, the grass grows a little faster in the spring, but it's not like it was some jungle. Still, the fine came through, $1.75. I could barely even look at the notice. What was the point of trying anymore? I couldn't escape it. It was always something. And then came the lake. After Karen's casual announcement, I couldn't just sit back and wait for the inevitable. I mean, how could I? The lake wasn't just some piece of land. It was a part of me. So I started asking around, talking to the neighbors. Most of them were too scared to say anything against the HOA. They'd been living under Karen's thumb for years. A few had mentioned that they felt like things were getting out of hand, but no one had the guts to stand up to her. Not like I did. I knew I had to dig deeper. So, I went through the HOA records. I'd learned a thing or two from the past fines. There was something strange about the way they operated. The rules were never clear, and Karen's power over the board was undeniable. She'd made sure of that. The more I dug, the more I found. Emails, meeting minutes, stuff that should have been public, but wasn't. It was all starting to make sense. Karen had been quietly manipulating the HOA for years, using her position to make money off community properties, including the lake. And it wasn't just her personal vendetta against me. No, Karen had a plan. A big plan. And the lake was at the center of it. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It hit me like a ton of bricks. The HOA had been planning to sell the lake for months, and no one had been told. Not a single homeowner was consulted, not even about the possibility of it. And Karen was at the helm of it all. She'd carefully orchestrated every detail, covering her tracks so that no one would know what was happening until it was too late. The lake wasn't just an asset to her. It was a commodity to be traded. And the worst part? She had the approval from the board, despite it never being discussed in a public meeting. I could feel the rage building inside me. This wasn't just about petty fines anymore. This was about justice. How could they think they could take something like this from me without any sort of warning? Without a single shred of respect for what that lake meant? I wasn't going to let it slide. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what yet. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. But I couldn't just go in all guns blazing. I needed more proof. I had to be smart about this. So, I started doing what I do best. I researched. I looked into HOA bylaws, property laws, anything I could get my hands on. I needed to know my rights. And then, a few days later, I found it. An invitation to an HOA meeting, one that was being held in a few days. And guess what the agenda was? You guessed it, the sale of the lake. I couldn't believe it. I had to attend. This was my chance. The proof I'd been looking for. If I could get into that meeting, if I could confront Karen with the truth, it would change everything. I had to be there, no matter what. The day of the meeting, I was a mess of emotions, nervous, angry, but also strangely hopeful. I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me as I walked into the community center where the meeting was held. I knew this would be the turning point. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I was ready to finally face her and show her I wasn't afraid. The room was buzzing when I arrived. Neighbors murmured amongst themselves, a mix of anticipation and nervous energy filling the air. Everyone was there, except Karen, of course. Her absence was unsettling, but I knew she'd be there soon. She was always the last to arrive, always making her entrance like it was some kind of royal occasion. It was as if she wanted to remind everyone just how much power she had. When the door finally swung open, Karen strutted in like she owned the place. Everyone quieted down, their attention turning to her immediately. She gave me that look, the one that said she knew I'd been snooping, but she didn't care. She was untouchable, but I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything I'd learned. I sat there, watching her, waiting for the right moment. The tension in the room was palpable, like something was about to snap. It was almost as if everyone was holding their breath, unsure of what would happen next. And then Karen finally spoke. "All right, everyone," she began, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she always used. "Let's talk about the lake." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as she continued speaking, outlining the sale in the most casual way possible. But then, she said something that stopped me dead in my tracks. The deal's already been finalized. The buyer's ready to sign. I sat there in that room, surrounded by people who were just as trapped as I was, yet I felt completely alone. The more Karen spoke, the less I could hear her words. It wasn't just the content of her speech. It was the weight of what she was saying, the gravity of what she was doing to my home, my family, and my memories. I couldn't believe it was happening. The lake wasn't just land. It was a piece of me, a piece of my past. I had so many memories there, lazy summer days spent fishing with my father, the sound of my kids laughing as they splashed around in the water. It was the one place I could escape, the one place I felt truly free. But here she was, standing in front of everyone, casually auctioning off something that meant so much to me, like it was some insignificant plot of land. And the worst part? I couldn't do anything about it. Or at least, that's how it felt. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands trembling. It was like the room was closing in on me, and I couldn't get a full breath. Everyone else seemed to be too afraid to speak up, their eyes glued to Karen like they were waiting for her approval. What kind of community was this, where everyone just sat back and watched while the HOA took control of everything? I wanted to stand up, to shout, to do something. But fear held me back. Fear of what? Fear that I didn't have the power to fight back? Fear that I was just another victim of an unjust system? That I'd lose everything if I dared challenge Karen? I thought about the consequences. What if I lost? What if the HOA retaliated with even more fines, even more control? What if my family ended up paying the price for my defiance? It was hard not to feel like I was fighting an uphill battle. Karen had all the cards. She had the power, the influence, the board members who followed her every word. But then, I thought about the lake again. The memories. The place that had been there for me when I needed it the most. I couldn't just let it slip through my fingers. I couldn't. I kept telling myself that maybe it was easier to just let it go. To move on, find another place, let Karen and her team of puppets get away with it. But deep down, I knew I couldn't do that. Not when it meant giving up something that was a part of my soul. It wasn't just about the lake, though. It was about standing up for what was right. It was about fighting against a system that crushed people, slowly and quietly, until they were too beaten down to fight anymore. I wasn't the only one the HOA had targeted, and I knew that if I didn't stand up now, they'd just keep pushing, keep taking, and eventually, everyone would fall in line, just like they had before. It was then that the anger started to build inside me. It was quiet at first, just a flicker of determination, but it was growing. I didn't have to accept this. I didn't have to let Karen take everything I held dear. I had a choice. I stood up from my seat abruptly, causing a few heads to turn in my direction. The meeting had been going on for a while, and I could tell Karen was getting comfortable, her smug smile only widening as she watched the reactions around the room. "Wait a minute," I said, trying to steady my voice. "You're telling me you've already sold my lake without even asking me?" There was a brief silence in the room. Everyone turned to look at me. Karen's eyes narrowed, and I could almost hear her internal calculations. Should she dismiss me or engage? She was used to being the one in control, the one calling the shots, but I could see her hesitation now. I was breaking the script. She cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. "The lake belongs to the community," she said, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "We've decided it's time for development. The community benefits, and we all move forward." I wanted to scream. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was frustration, anger. How could she stand there and say that with such confidence, knowing full well she was manipulating the situation to line her pockets? I forced myself to take a deep breath, to stay calm, to think. I knew I couldn't just barge in, demanding answers. No, I needed to approach this with a strategy. I had to be smart about it. As Karen kept talking, my mind raced. I thought about everything I'd found. The secret meetings, the manipulated documents, the way she'd kept everyone in the dark. It was wrong. It was illegal. And it wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about stopping her from getting away with it. If I let her, she'd do this to someone else next. Someone who wasn't ready to fight. But what could I really do? I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't some big shot who could just waltz into court and win. I had no idea what kind of game I was up against. But I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't do something, Karen would win. And I couldn't live with that. I needed to know my rights. I needed to find out if there was any way I could legally challenge this. But where to begin? I wasn't sure. But I knew I had to start researching, start making calls. I had to dig deeper, find a way to turn the tables before it was too late. And then, I made a decision. I was going to fight back. I wasn't going to let Karen take everything I loved without a fight. As the meeting continued, I made my way home, determined to get to work. But just as I reached my front door, I noticed something strange. A letter slipped under the door. The return address? The HOA's office. My heart dropped as I picked it up, not knowing what kind of bombshell it would drop next. I barely slept that night. The letter from the HOA had been slipping through my mind like a bad dream, gnawing at me as I tossed and turned. I kept thinking about the look on Karen's face when she spoke about the sale of the lake like it was some simple transaction, like she was buying a new kitchen appliance. My mind raced, every thought tainted by her voice. But there was one thing that kept pulling me back into reality: evidence. If I wanted to stop this, if I was going to have a shot at taking down Karen and the HOA, I needed more than just a gut feeling. I needed hard, undeniable proof. So that's what I did. I started digging. The HOA kept a lot of records. They had to, right? They were supposed to be a non-profit organization, serving the community, they said. So, the first thing I did was track down their bylaws. It took some time, but I managed to get my hands on them, buried deep in the HOA's legal documents. I started reading through page after page of dry legalese, my eyes burning with frustration. Some of it made sense, but a lot of it felt off. Karen had a way of bending things, twisting the rules to fit her narrative. As I combed through the pages, I noticed something strange. Several provisions were either vague or, worse, contradictory. The bylaws talked about property management, but they didn't specify who had the final say on certain community decisions. There was a section that mentioned the lake, just a small note about how it was common property for the benefit of the neighborhood. Nothing too alarming. But then I found it. A clause buried in the back, deep in the legal jargon, talked about the HOA's authority to lease or sell communal land if it was deemed in the best interest of the community. Now, that stopped me cold. Because, as far as I could tell, nothing about the sale of the lake had ever been discussed with the neighborhood. The board members had never brought it up in a public meeting, and certainly not in any of the recent ones I had attended. So why was this clause there? What was Karen trying to pull? It didn't make any sense. I couldn't stop there. My gut told me something was fishy, and when my gut speaks, I listen. I started looking for any signs of past legal trouble. The HOA wasn't exactly known for transparency, but I figured if there had been any lawsuits or complaints against them, they'd be public knowledge. I spent hours digging online, sifting through local government records, finding a trail of old disputes. One in particular caught my eye, a lawsuit filed 5 years ago by a group of residents who had been fined unfairly by the HOA. The case never went to trial, but the records were full of strange details. I noticed something even more troubling. Karen had been mentioned in the lawsuit as the person who had authorized several fines without consulting the board. That was a huge red flag. She'd been operating like the HOA was her personal fiefdom, and now I was starting to see the pattern. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was furious. Every day felt like I was inching closer to uncovering something massive. The more I read, the more I realized how deep the corruption ran. Karen wasn't just trying to take the lake for herself. She was exploiting the HOA's resources for personal gain. But I had to know more. I needed the smoking gun. It wasn't long before I found it. While going through some old financial records from the HOA, I came across a series of transactions marked as land maintenance fees. A few of these transactions seemed perfectly legitimate at first, standard upkeep expenses, right? But then, one name popped up over and over again, a name I recognized from the list of companies that had been involved in the lake development proposal. The more I looked into it, the clearer it became. Karen was working with these developers, pushing the sale of the lake under the guise of community improvement. She wasn't just planning on selling the lake to the highest bidder, she was getting paid. And a lot. My heart was pounding as I stared at the records. This wasn't just shady, it was illegal. I had found the smoking gun I needed. I knew right then that I couldn't just keep this to myself. I had to confront her with it. I had to expose her for what she was doing. But there was a problem. I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I needed someone who knew how to navigate the legal maze Karen had set up. Someone who could help me turn this into more than just a personal vendetta. I was out of my depth. But I was in too deep to back out now. So, I made a call. I reached out to a lawyer, someone who specialized in property law and had dealt with HOAs before. My hands were shaking as I left the message on his voicemail, explaining the situation. I felt like I was on the edge of something big, something that could change everything. But I wasn't prepared for what would come next. Later that night, just as I was about to close my laptop, I received a strange email. It was from a neighborhood contact I'd made over the past few weeks, someone who had worked with the HOA board. The subject line simply read, "They're planning something big tomorrow. Be ready." The HOA meeting was set up like any other. The same stiff chairs arranged in neat rows, the same board faces around the table, the same familiar, almost ritualistic process. It should have been just another routine meeting. But as I walked into that room, I knew it was anything but routine. This time, I wasn't there to just sit quietly in the back. This time, I was there to confront Karen. I could already feel the tension in the air. It was thick, like the whole room was waiting for something to happen, but no one dared to make the first move. I could feel their eyes on me as I sat down, like they were all silently wondering if I would speak up. Karen hadn't arrived yet, but I knew she'd be there soon. She always liked to make her grand entrance. It was her show, after all. As the meeting started, I couldn't focus on anything the others were saying. I was too distracted, too consumed by the thought of what was coming next. I had the evidence, clear, irrefutable proof of Karen's manipulation. The financial records, the hidden clauses, the shady deals with the developers. It was all there. And now, it was time for her to face the music. Then, the door opened. Karen walked in like she owned the place, tall, confident, with that smile that oozed power. She was dressed in her usual power suit, the one that made her look more like a corporate shark than a neighborhood president. She took her seat at the head of the table, and I swear, the entire room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, like they were all just waiting for her to take control. But not me. Not anymore. I stood up, my heart hammering in my chest. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me, eyes wide with curiosity and unease. I wasn't sure how I was going to do this, but I knew I couldn't back down now. The lake was too important. My home was too important. "Karen," I said, my voice shaking at first, but I pushed through. "We need to talk about the lake. The one you're planning to sell. You never consulted the homeowners about it. You never asked anyone's opinion. You just decided to go behind everyone's back." I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, but I kept my eyes locked on Karen. Her face shifted for a moment, just the slightest flicker of something like surprise, but it quickly turned into a practiced smile. Now, she said, her tone smooth, almost condescending. "Let's not make a scene. I'm sure you're just confused. The lake is part of the community's development plan. It's a decision made by the board. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore." I pulled out the stack of documents I'd gathered, the financial records, the proof of the developer's involvement, the legal clauses I'd uncovered. I slammed them down on the table, watching as Karen's smile faltered, just for a second. I'm not confused, I said, the anger rising in my chest. I know exactly what you're doing. You're selling the lake for profit, and you're using the HOA to do it. You've been manipulating the board and everyone else to get what you want. This is illegal, Karen, and I've got the proof. The room was dead silent. Even the other board members seemed to shrink back, eyes flicking between Karen and me, unsure of what to do. I could see the cracks starting to form in Karen's facade. She wasn't the all-powerful leader anymore. She was vulnerable, but she wasn't about to back down. Not without a fight. Listen, she said, her voice tight now. You don't know what you're talking about. These are just accusations. She stood up, a little too fast, almost knocking over her chair. I'm the HOA president. I have the authority to make these decisions. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she pointed directly at me. You don't know what it takes to run a community. Her words felt like a slap, but they didn't sting the way they used to. I was beyond that now. I was done being intimidated. Oh, I know exactly what it takes. I fired back, my hands gripping the edge of the table. It takes honesty, integrity, something you clearly know nothing about. She inhaled sharply, as if she were about to say something else, but instead, she snapped her fingers, and the meeting room suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. The other board members shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Not a single one of them had the guts to challenge Karen. They were all too scared, too wrapped up in the power she held over them. Karen's face was red now, her calm exterior slipping. She glared at me, eyes burning with barely concealed fury. You've made a huge mistake, she said, her voice low and threatening. You're going to regret this. Do you really think you can just waltz in here and accuse me of fraud? Of mismanaging the HOA? You don't know what you're messing with. I have connections. I've got lawyers. You don't stand a chance. And if you keep this up, I'll make sure you never step foot in this community again. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I stood my ground. I knew I was on the right side of this. I knew what I had in my hands could destroy her. But hearing her threats, seeing the desperation in her eyes, it made me realize how far she was willing to go to keep control. She wasn't just fighting to protect the lake. She was fighting to protect herself, her power, everything she'd built off the backs of people like me. Do your worst, I said, finally finding my voice. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm not backing down. You'll have to take me down first. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her eyes flashing with a mixture of rage and fear. And for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had her. But then, she straightened up, put on that smug smile of hers, and spoke one last time. We'll see about that, she said, her voice cold. This isn't over. As she turned away, I noticed something on the table. A small, folded piece of paper. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it. And as I opened it, I saw the words, "Meet me at the lake. Midnight." It was the middle of the night when I received that note. My heart raced as I stared at it, trying to make sense of the message. Meet me at the lake. Midnight. No signature, no explanation. Just a direct, urgent command. I wasn't sure whether it was a trap or a chance to learn more, but either way, it felt like the next step in the fight I knew was coming. But that was later. Right now, I had to prepare for war. The HOA had controlled this neighborhood for far too long, and it was time to turn the tide. I had the evidence. I had the fire in my belly. But what I needed next was support. People who were as fed up as I was. People who understood that Karen's reign couldn't go on any longer. I started by reaching out to a few neighbors, ones I knew had been quietly grumbling about the HOA for years, but never had the courage to speak up. These were the people who got fined for having a slightly unkempt lawn or for not picking up their dog's waste fast enough. They'd been systematically silenced by the HOA's authority, too scared to challenge it. But now, they were starting to listen. The first person I approached was Greg, an older guy who'd lived in the neighborhood longer than I had. He was a quiet type, the kind who just wanted to enjoy his retirement without anyone telling him what to do. But he'd had enough of the HOA's meddling, and I could tell he was ready for a change. I don't want any part in this HOA mess, he said when I first brought it up. But Karen's pushing it too far now, hasn't she? I nodded. Exactly. She's selling our lake, Greg, without anyone's consent, without even telling the homeowners. That caught his attention. Selling the lake? Are you sure? I showed him the documents I'd uncovered, the hidden clauses, the shady transactions. His eyes widened as he scanned through them. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. I always knew something wasn't right around here. She's been running this like it's her personal playground. We talked for a while longer, and by the end of it, Greg was on board. He wasn't the loud type, but he knew enough people in the neighborhood, and I could tell he was ready to stand up, even if it was just to see Karen's downfall. The next person I approached was Tanya, a mother of two who had been getting hit with fines for the smallest things, like not trimming her hedges exactly the way the HOA preferred. I'd seen her around, always with a smile, but I knew she was angry underneath that calm exterior. I don't even know why I put up with this crap, she said when I told her about Karen's plans. I've been following every rule, every ridiculous one, and for what? So she can sell off what's ours. I could hear the frustration in her voice. Tanya, you don't have to put up with it anymore. We can fight back. I've got the proof we need. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something fierce in her expression. She wasn't just going to stand by anymore. She was ready to take action. You've got my support. Let's take her down. With Greg and Tanya on my side, I started looking for others. The more I spoke to people, the more I realized just how many had been silently suffering under Karen's rule. Neighbors who'd gotten fines for absurd reasons. People who had been manipulated into silence by the constant threat of HOA retaliation. The more I learned, the more disgusted I became. Karen had been running this place like it was her own personal fiefdom, using her power to line her pockets while punishing anyone who dared step out of line. The next few days were a blur of meetings and phone calls. I spent hours researching legal options, learning about the HOA bylaws, and trying to find a way to expose Karen's actions without risking everything. I knew I had to be smart. This wasn't just about taking Karen down. It was about breaking the system, about showing the neighborhood that we didn't have to live in fear anymore. I went through everything I could find. I started working on a formal complaint, something that would expose the HOA's illegal activities in a way that couldn't be ignored. I contacted a lawyer, someone who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. At first, I wasn't sure if I could afford it, but I knew I needed expert help if I was going to challenge Karen's manipulation. The lawyer was skeptical at first. This is a tough battle, he told me, but it's not impossible. The HOA has a lot of power, but they also have a lot of flaws. And you've got evidence on your side. That gave me some hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. I had a team, a coalition of neighbors who were just as fed up as I was. Together, we could take on the HOA, and together, we could stop Karen from selling the lake. By the time we were ready to make our move, the momentum had built. I had gathered signatures from dozens of neighbors who were sick of Karen's control. I'd managed to get everyone on board with the idea of a public stand, an official letter to the HOA board, demanding answers, demanding action. It was our first shot at real resistance. As I stood in front of the group, holding the letter in my hands, I felt the weight of what we were about to do. It wasn't just a letter. It was a declaration that we weren't going to stand by while Karen and the HOA destroyed everything we valued. We're doing this, I said, looking at the faces in the room. This is our community, and we're not letting anyone sell it out from under us. With a deep breath, I sealed the envelope and handed it to Greg, who was going to drop it off with the HOA office first thing the next morning. It felt like the first real step in a long journey, but I couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. We were fighting back, but just as I thought things might be falling into place, I received a call. It was from the lawyer. You need to meet with me. It's about Karen. She's got something planned, and it's bigger than we thought. The day of the meeting felt like a storm was about to break. The air in the room was thick with tension, the same stale feeling I'd gotten used to every time I attended an HOA meeting. But today was different. Today, I was ready to make my move. I wasn't just going to sit there and let Karen get away with her schemes anymore. I had everything I needed, the legal support, the evidence, and a growing sense of empowerment. And the best part? I wasn't alone. I had the support of my neighbors, the ones who had finally grown sick of Karen's manipulative reign. I could feel my palms sweat as I sat down in my usual seat, but this time, I didn't try to hide. This time, I wasn't just another face in the crowd. This time, I was about to flip the script. Karen walked in, her usual confident stride, but there was something different about her today. Maybe it was the way she kept glancing at me, or the faint nervousness she tried to mask with that fake smile of hers. It was almost like she knew something was coming. like she knew her power was slipping through her fingers. And she wasn't ready for that. The meeting began like any other. The same small talk. The same boring updates about neighborhood events. But I wasn't there for that. I was there to expose Karen for the fraud she was, and nothing was going to stop me. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, and immediately, the room went silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I didn't care. I had a job to do. Karen, I said, my voice steady but filled with a quiet fire. We need to talk about the lake. About what you've been doing behind everyone's backs. Karen's face stiffened instantly. I saw her hand tighten around the stack of papers she was holding, but she didn't speak. Not yet. She was too good at hiding her panic, but I could see it in the way her jaw clenched. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for. I've got evidence, I continued, placing the files I'd collected on the table for everyone to see. Proof that you've been manipulating the HOA for your personal gain. I have documents that show the lake was never yours to sell. You've been misusing your position, Karen, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. The room remained still, and for a brief moment, I felt a wave of uncertainty. Was I doing the right thing? Could I really pull this off? But then I saw the faces of the other homeowners, the ones who had quietly supported me behind the scenes, the ones who had signed the petition, the ones who had been watching Karen's reign with increasing frustration. Their eyes weren't filled with doubt. They were filled with hope. I wasn't alone. I had a community behind me. I pointed to the documents in front of me. These are the financial records that prove Karen has been involved in this illegal transaction with the developers. And these, I said, flipping through the pages, are the HOA's own bylaws, which she's been ignoring. She's been selling community property without approval, without informing the homeowners. And she's been lining her pockets with the proceeds. Karen shot up from her seat, her face flushed with rage. This is nonsense. None of this is true, she barked. You're just trying to stir up trouble where there is none. But the damage was already done. I saw it in the faces of the board members. They were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The longer Karen tried to dismiss me, the more they started to question her. They couldn't hide it anymore. The cracks in her facade were showing. Karen, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, you don't get to silence the truth anymore. You've taken advantage of this community for too long. And now, it's time to pay for it. Karen's eyes flicked around the room, and for the first time, I saw real fear in them. She tried to gather her composure, but the damage was done. The board members weren't looking at her the same way anymore. Their gaze had shifted. The support they once gave her was starting to falter. Don't listen to him, Karen spat, her voice sharp, desperate. He's lying. He doesn't know anything about what's best for this community. He's just trying to make a name for himself. But it was too late. The room wasn't on her side anymore. People were talking, murmuring among themselves. The board members were shifting uncomfortably, glancing between Karen and me. One of the members, a woman I hadn't spoken to much before, finally spoke up. Karen, she said, her voice quiet but firm. These documents, these are troubling. She turned to the others. I think we need to look into this further. Karen's face went pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She was losing control, and she knew it. The power she had wielded over this neighborhood for so long was slipping through her fingers. I could feel the shift. The room had changed. The power dynamics had shifted, and I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone in this community who had suffered under Karen's rule. We were taking our neighborhood back. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. The board members discussed in hushed tones, glancing nervously at Karen. I could see the writing on the wall. They were turning on her. She was finished. Finally, the head of the board, a man who had been silent through most of the meeting, cleared his throat. We've heard enough, he said. Karen, you've been removed from your position as HOA president. Effective immediately, the room was quiet. Karen stood frozen, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The room had spoken. The decision had been made. But as Karen stormed out of the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning, and I had a sinking feeling that Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. The air in the neighborhood felt different in the days after Karen's removal. It was as if a weight had been lifted from all our shoulders. The HOA's grip on this place was finally starting to loosen. And for the first time in years, people were starting to feel like they had a voice again. I had a voice again. Karen had been removed from her position as HOA president, but the fallout didn't stop there. The board, once so eager to follow her lead, had been forced to reevaluate everything. They knew the community wouldn't stand for it anymore. They had no choice but to apologize publicly for the decisions that had been made under Karen's leadership. The lake was saved, and with that, the heart of this neighborhood, my neighborhood, was preserved. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone who had been silenced, intimidated, or ignored. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Not fully, anyway. I wasn't the kind of person who reveled in someone else's downfall, even if it was someone as corrupt as Karen. I knew that she had spent years building up her power, manipulating people to get what she wanted. Watching her crumble in front of the board, helpless and humiliated, it wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. It was a reminder of how much damage someone like her could do when they're allowed to wield unchecked power. But now, the damage was undone, and that was something to be proud of. As the days passed, I spent more time reflecting on everything that had happened. I realized that this fight, this victory, wasn't just about protecting the lake or taking down Karen. It was about reclaiming my sense of justice. It was about standing up when everything seemed stacked against me and refusing to be intimidated. And in the process, I learned something about myself. Something I didn't know I had inside me. I was capable of fighting back, of challenging a system that felt invincible. I wasn't going to sit by and let injustice slide anymore. That, more than anything, was the real win. I think the people around me realized that too. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down and followed every ridiculous rule the HOA threw their way started speaking up. They started questioning things, started asking for change. It wasn't just a few of us anymore. It was the whole community, beginning to find its voice. That was the real power, the one I hadn't fully understood until now. We could change things. Together. The lake, which had been the symbol of Karen's overreach, became a symbol of the community's strength. We weren't going to let it be taken from us. Not by her, and not by anyone else. It was ours, and we weren't going to let anyone else decide what happened to it. But, of course, Karen wasn't going to take this quietly. I knew she wouldn't. She was done as HOA president, but that didn't mean she was out of the picture entirely. In the days after her removal, there were whispers. Whispers of her trying to rally support, of her plotting to somehow regain control. I wasn't naive enough to think she'd go away without a fight. And sure enough, as the weeks passed, I started getting calls, anonymous ones, warning me that Karen was making moves behind the scenes. She wasn't done yet. I was prepared for this. In the back of my mind, I knew she wouldn't just accept defeat. But whatever she had planned, I was ready. I had the support of the neighborhood, the backing of the board, and I wasn't going to let her wreck what we had rebuilt. I wasn't going to let her drag us back into the darkness. And then, one afternoon, I got a call. A real one this time. It was from Greg, one of my allies in this fight. His voice was tense, like he was holding something back. "You need to come down to the lake," he said, urgency in his voice. "Karen's here. She's with a lawyer." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what was going on. Karen wasn't done. She wasn't just going to slink away and accept defeat. She was making one final play. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything we had fought for. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, determined to face whatever came next. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Not as long as Karen was still out there, trying to reclaim what she had lost. As I walked toward the lake, I saw Karen standing there, her back to me, speaking with the lawyer. And as I got closer, I overheard her say something that made my heart stop. "I'm not giving up on this. I will take this to court if I have to." I'm standing here, looking out over the lake, the same lake Karen tried to take from us. The same lake that almost slipped through our fingers, but we fought for it. We won. And as I reflect on everything that's happened, I can't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. It's not about the lake anymore. It's about the fight. It's about standing up when it feels like the world is pushing you down, when it feels like you're too small to make a difference. But you can. I've seen it. We've seen it. I'm not the same person who walked into that first HOA meeting, unsure of what was going on. I didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went. But I found out. And what I learned along the way, what I came to understand, is that we can fight back. We don't have to just accept things the way they are. We don't have to live in fear of a system that's supposed to serve us. Because that's what it is, our system. Not Karen's. Not anyone else's. You see, It's easy to feel like we're powerless in situations like this. The HOA can seem all-powerful, like they control everything, like they hold the keys to your home and your life. But they don't. No one does. Not as long as we stand together. That's what I realized. When we join forces, when we stop letting fear control us, when we start speaking out, we change things. We make a difference. And that's what this fight was about. It wasn't just about the lake. It was about proving that no one can control us if we stand united. I didn't think I was capable of taking on something like this. I didn't think I could stand up to Karen, to the HOA, to a system that had been in place for years. But I did. And I'm here to tell you, if I can do it, so can you. Whether it's your HOA, a local council, or any system that's holding you back, don't accept it. Don't just sit back and take what they give you. Stand up. Fight. You have the power. I know what it's like to feel alone in this. I know what it's like to feel like no one else cares. I was there. I was isolated, frustrated, wondering if anyone else saw what was happening. But the truth is, there are others out there who feel the same way. You're not alone. You just have to find them. You have to find the people who are as fed up as you are, who are ready to take action. And together, you can change things. Together, you can make a difference. This wasn't just about taking down Karen. It was about making a statement. It was about showing the neighborhood that we didn't have to accept a broken system. We could rebuild it. And we did. But this isn't over. We've won this battle, but there will be more. There will always be more. And the fight doesn't end here. Because when one person stands up, when one person refuses to back down, it starts a ripple effect. It inspires others to do the same. So, I'm asking you, what's your story? What's your HOA struggle? What's been your battle? Because I know you've got one. I know you've faced the same things I have. Whether it's fines, overreach, or unfair rules, I want to hear it. Share your story with me. Share it with others. Because this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about coming together, taking action, and making sure our voices are heard. The fight is never easy, but it's worth it. Because in the end, it's about justice. It's about reclaiming what's ours. And as long as we keep standing up, as long as we keep fighting together, there's nothing we can't do. If you've enjoyed this journey with me, make sure to hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to Confessions of HOA so you never miss a story. Until next time, remember, you've got the power. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next one.